Hi, and welcome to whatever it is I'm calling this thing. I still haven't figured that out. I'm toying with creative dynamos. What do you think of that?
Dynamic.
Yeah. Hello and welcome to Creative Dynamos with Scott Roche. Today I am interviewing Michael Melwassul. Michael, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing well. For those of my audience that don't know who you are, give me a little information about yourself.
I am an author of this book, which I don't have mirroring on here, so people are gonna have to struggle.
That
Paragon
that's o
Exordium
that's
of the
okay.
Galvorn Saga.
I have a nice big picture just to the left of you,
Awesome.
with your cover.
Sweet. Yeah, so Michael Melwassul, primary author of the co-authorship behind the Paragon Exordium and the Galvorn Saga, which is epic fantasy set in an apocalyptic wasteland of our world.
Awesome. Michael and I have known each other for quite a while, through TikTok and the author community that exists through there, and that's been awesome. I'm a big fan of Michael's. If you go on Amazon and read a review of his book that I wrote, I gave it 6 stars, or at least I would have if Amazon would have allowed me to do that, because a combination of the fact because his book is just that good, and, I determined that any book that gets me to read and enjoy a genre that I have almost written off, gets that extra star because I I got tired of the same old in terms of epic fantasy. And Michael, your book is this combination of urban fantasy and epic fantasy that I am not aware of existing anywhere else
Yeah.
in the mix. So, uh, let me get a couple of general questions out of the way, and then we'll get into the specifics. How long have you been a writer?
Ooh, that's tough. I mean, I wrote a short story when I was like 13. And I wrote a couple of short stories around that time. So that would make it 17 years. But like as far as published writer, 3, but I've been writing consistently since for about 8 years. So it really just depends on where you define yourself. I would say my almost my entire adult life
And is Paragon Exordium the first full-length novel work that you've written?
and then some, yeah.
And by full length, like, what is it, 600 pages, 650
It's
pages?
down to 550 because we reformatted.
Okay. It's a chonker. But I say in my review, like, it's one of those books that it's deceptive. Like, I
Yeah.
read it, uh, in probably a couple of days. I'm a fast reader, but it notwithstanding that, there are certainly books that are not as long that I've taken
Mhm.
longer to finish reading. It's just one of those books that the pacing is so good that it didn't feel like I had just read like a 600 page, a 550 page book. Um, so you co-wrote this book.
Mhm.
You're with your co-author David, is that right?
Mhm. Yep.
And I've talked with David a little bit through social media. Um, what did that writing process look like?
Yeah, so really Dave's credited as a editor for book 1 because that's what he was initially brought in on as. Because I wrote like the first whole act by hand myself, and then I was like, "Well, I've got the first act of this. I wanna bring on someone who's got military experience because there's a really heavy military element. I wanna make sure that's really grounded and stuff." And so Dave was a good buddy of mine who was in the military, had an English degree, and he was someone I knew would tell me if I was wasting my time.
Mhm.
So I was like, "Hey man, can you take a look at this?" And he took a look and he's like, "This is good. You're not wasting your time. Let's make it better." And so one 2-hour meeting to review turned into weekly multi-hour meetings over the course of years. And he became so involved in not just the editing process, but the storytelling process and the character development and interesting characters and ideas to the point where by the end, I was like, "You're my co-author. We're promoting you. Next book and books going forward is going to be Michael D. Melwassul because Melwassul's already a pseudonym, so he's
Mhm,
just part of the pen name."
mhm,
Um, so it's been a very evolving along the way process.
right. And this book is full of military genre jargon, excuse me, and the main character is a former military moved into the private sector security um, guy, and so it's good to get those details
Mhm.
correct, because I'm sure you've got a lot of fans who, if you had gotten any of that stuff wrong, they would have thrown the book across the room. Well, probably not across the room, because you would have to be fairly strong to do that. Yes, there will be a lot of references to how big this book is. Um, it's important to get those details correct, and,
Mhm.
there's only so much that research, I think, can get you when it comes to
Right.
that kind of thing. There's a certain mindset and, a certain, um, way of doing things that guys with military experience, have,
Yeah.
and
I
to
mean,
get
there's
that.
in jokes, right? There's in jokes. There's all kinds of elements where you could fake it, but having his contribution to that really does help. And a big reason behind it was we didn't want it. I wanted it to help expand the immersion, right? Because if you're an expert in something, whenever you see something wrong in a story that takes place around that, it's going to pull you out of the immersion. So that was really important to me. And like there's big parts of it that a lot of people with military experience enjoy. Like there's a joke about you can't spell lost without LT. Which is Dave joke that he put in there that he insists he's like we have to have this because it's
Yes.
and I would have never written that on my own.
Yep,
Um, so
yep.
he's had some pretty monumental influence.
And it's those little touches, like,
Yeah.
that are important. It's funny. Um, it's something like I'm a military brat, and I that's the kind of humor I can appreciate. I was
Right.
never in the military, but I'm clued in enough, and I have enough military family members that I get that humor. Um, but you'll get people who uh, they they won't necessarily get that, but the people that have that experience love those little touches. Um, so what made you decide to, uh, do well, so basically what's happened in this world is the the fantasy world has sort of collided with our real world in the 20th or 21st century. I'm not sure what the date is, uh, in the book, but it's basically, well, maybe you can describe it a little bit better.
Yeah, and I mean, you're not sure what the date is because we leave it intentionally blank, because we wanted to kind of have it live in a sort of timeless space. And there's always going to be a degree of time applied to it, right, retroactively, but we don't get super specific with it. But like 2000s era. Um, so yeah, it's a story where magic used to exist in our world, and 10,000 years ago, a spell pulled it and the memory of it out of our world. And then in modern times, the spell breaks, it shatters the sky, and humanity is wiped out almost instantaneously, or borderline wiped out. And so those who survived that initial return are trying to figure out how to adapt and survive in a world that's now overrun with not only magic but monsters.
And so you got this great, um, crossover. And this is where the urban fantasy crosses over with the epic fantasy, because you've
Mhm.
got all the tropes of your traditional epic fantasy, elves, dwarves, um, high magic, etc. With epic fantasy, well, I mean, with urban fantasy,
Mhm.
you've got your main character, wields a submachine gun and a sword, a magic
Right.
sword, you know. Um, So, what made you decide to do that kind of mashup?
Yeah, I mean, growing up, I was really into fantasy and reading all kinds of fantasy books, and I always like wanted to have like a fantasy world come to our world in one sense or another. So the original concept actually came from I was reading Lord of the Rings at like 12 years old or whatever, and my dad showed me the 80s movie Red Dawn,
Mhm,
where
mhm.
America gets invaded by communists and stuff.
Good
And I was like,
dad. Good dad
yeah,
move.
right, great film. And I was like, what if that happened? I had actually had a dream that night. I was like, what if that happened with like fantasy races like Tolkien races and stuff. And I was like, well, that's a fun concept I've never seen anywhere.
Mhm.
And teenage me loves that idea. And so I just held on to that idea as the book I want to write for the next decade until I had time to actually start writing it.
One of the, one of the things that I enjoy, I say you pull in tropes
Mhm,
um, from both of these genres. One of the things that I really enjoy about your book, though, is you make these things your own.
mhm.
Your dwarves are not your typical dwarves, for example. Tell us a little bit about how you made dwarves a little bit different in your work.
Yeah, that's always something Dave and I look at whenever we're introducing a group or a species is how can we make this distinctive but unique, familiar but distinctive, right?
Mhm,
Is we want people to recognize it, but we don't want it to be the same tired old thing. And so the dwarf thing, there's a couple different ways they're different from their accents being Russian accents
mhm,
instead of the typical kind of Scottish Irish accent, which was all based on this idea. Like that goes back to an idea in college. I had these two friends who were constantly quoting a video game, just saying cheeky breaky, which is Russian prison slang for everything's going to be okay. And so I was like, I need some dwarves. I'm going to base them on these two lunatic friends of mine who are always saying cheeky breaky. So how funny would be if the dwarves have Russian accents? And so that just turned into, okay, why do the dwarves have Russian accents? It's because of language barrier. And the first person they meet in South Georgia is this dude who's like full on Russian, and they adopt the language from him, then learn to speak English after learning to speak Russian originally. And so just it feeds into itself. But then there's elements of dwarvish culture that go a lot deeper and ask bigger questions that aren't just a reference to two friends I had in college, right? It's like,
mhm,
how can we make this work within the world? And so one of the things is a lot of it plays back to we wrote a whole origin of species that's not really included in the story because it's so dense and there's a lot to it. But it stems back to essentially orcs or dwarves and elves having sort of a butting of heads in the Garden of Eden. And elves got eternal life and dwarves got long life, but not eternal life.
okay,
And so I was like, how does that affect the psychology of their species? And so dwarvish, the way we determined that would affect the psychology of dwarves is they become obsessed with gaining as much knowledge as they can before they pass. So knowledge becomes a sort of currency to them. Even their curse word, which krisk, means to be forgotten, because the worst thing that can happen to something is it be forgotten.
mm,
And so like their grave, they have a library of the dead, which is just uh, a mausoleum, an ancient library of dwarves who've been encased in crystal with their story written on it. So
wow.
that every dwarf that passes away gets put in. And this is all tangential otherworld stuff that's in our brains that not necessarily in the story, but informs the characters and the world.
It's so important to have that in your back pocket, to have your Silmarillion, as it were,
Right.
because it it informs the story, it influences the story in little ways, and by the time you get to book, I don't know what your future plans are for the series, but by the time you get to book 4 or 5 or 6 or
Right.
whatever, people these things, and your fans are gonna pick up on these things as you thread them through, the narrative.
Right.
So, the it's it and it saves you from info dumping.
Hmm.
I've started writing my first fantasy novel, and the thing I'm most afraid of is info dumping, and so it having that knowledge in the back of your mind,
Hmm.
and just treating it like the real world with some extra flavor, um, I think saves you from that, and the fact that you do
Hmm.
have, uh it is taking place in the quote unquote real world, um, I guess flavored or layered over by this fantasy world
Hmm.
helps a little bit. You don't have to worry about things like your months having different names
Sure.
and things of that nature. Um, so it's good to know that you've got sort of the details, of all of this stuff worked out. It doesn't surprise me because um, everything is so uniform,
Hmm.
it feels real, and
Yeah.
you've put a serious thought. You and your co-author have put serious thought into this whole thing, which brings me to the magic system.
Okay.
Um, uh, again, as somebody who's writing my own fantasy novel, um, what kind of thought did you put into the magic system, and how does the magic system work in Paragon Exordium?
Okay. Well, you got another 2 hours set aside for this, right?
Yeah, yeah. Take as long as you need.
Oh man, you just hit the button right there. So it foundationally, magic exists as an additional form of energy. So like we've got essentially base elements of a reality,
Mhm.
right? So you've got different elements of matter, right? Gas, liquid, solid. Those magic is like a tangential element of matter that's just a constantly flowing energy source that's present everywhere. So with the magic system, I looked at things like language, and we drew influence from different groups and stuff. My favorite magic system of all time is from Aragon, and so that was a major inspiration. But I like the idea of essentially there being a broad energy and different cultures developing different ways to siphon and utilize that energy. And so different cultures and different races having different reactions to that and how they do it. So there's passive magic and there's active magic, and each version of that, there's like 8 schools of passive and active magic, and each one utilizes magic in a different way. But there's these things called castologies. And so a castology is how a specific race primarily uses their magic based on the rules they've established. So we've talked about dwarves. Dwarves use tattoos, runes to do their magic. So the magic, they take the energy, they siphon it through that rune. That rune has meaning, and that meaning gives direction to the spell.
Mhm.
And they tattoo the ones they want to have constantly used, the ones that are important to them, onto their body, and they siphon the runes through. For humans, it's spoken word, which is based on the concept of first spoken word being like Adam and Eve naming the animals, is where that harkens back to. Because again, with the origin of species and stuff, humanity was the origin of species, and dwarves and elves were taken from them, and that's a whole thing I'm not going to get into because that would take too much time.
Right.
But elves sing it, which is very referential to Tolkien's Silmarillion and singing and the power of song. And so I thought that would be a really neat way they use song and vocals in a different way from speaking. So they're similar, but they're unique to each other. And then orcs who didn't get magic the same way as everyone else in their origin, they actually use emotion to transfer that magic. So it's highly more unstable because emotion is more unstable. It's not as controlled, but they also have a weaker connection to it because magic stems back to a third tree in the Garden of Eden being the knowledge of. So you've got the two primary, if you're familiar with biblical stuff, Genesis, there's the tree of knowledge of good and evil and the tree of eternal life. There's a third tree in our world, which is the tree of the knowledge of the arcane.
Okay.
And so the father of the elves took fruit from that tree and ate it, and shared that fruit with the dwarves. And then I'm forgetting how the humans got access to an afterbite, and then essentially the orcs ate, like the elves took branches from the tree out of the garden and planted those, and then those were burned when humans discovered blood magic because Cain killed Abel in pursuit of
Yep.
magic. And so it all just ties together and goes up. But as far as how the magic system works, it's tapping into that energy and controlling that energy and manipulating that energy to change matter and change reality. And that can be done in different ways. So you've got two of the main characters have access to magic. Peter's magic is retroactive, not retroactive. What's the word? Reactive instead of proactive, essentially. So
Mhm.
he has a sixth sense, like Spider-Man, where he can feel magic interacting with things around him. So that gives him these enhanced reflexes and almost like future prediction, but more reactionary future prediction.
Yeah.
Whereas
A danger
Sarah,
sense. Yeah.
huh?
A
Go ahead.
danger
Sorry.
sense.
Danger sense. Yeah, exactly. And that's based on the magic developed that way because of his experiences through life,
Mhm.
right? And so Sarah has enhancement, so she's able to take something and make it expand or grow into more of that thing. So she can add to something. And so part of that also ties into when magic was stolen from our world, it changed the very fabric of humanity, or at least those who would have had it initially, right? And so I have cerebral palsy, essential tremors. And so this is something that I anticipated more pushback on than I actually got. So it's a really interesting topic because magic ties into disability in my world.
That was actually gonna be my next question, so that you anticipated me.
Yeah. So essentially, when magic was stolen from us, a part of much of humanity was stolen, and so the world example is essentially disabilities are a side effect of magic being absent from a mind or a body that should have had it.
Gotcha.
Right.
I like that. I
So
like
it
that a lot.
manifests itself in different ways. So like I think Sarah's is anemia, or it's a insufficient red blood cell, which I think is anemia. Is she's anemic? I think is what that's
Mhm.
called,
Mhm.
if I recall my research correctly. It's been a while since I wrote that. So that's why her magic manifests as enhancement because she's lacking a thing, and so the magic is trying to replace that thing. It's also initially her eyesight, which the magic fixes her eyesight because her eyesight is poor.
Mhm.
Um, and so that ties into that. And then Peter has some PTSD and stuff, which ties into his development of the reflexes and stuff and his other senses and whatnot. So when the shattering happens and magic returns, people who previously had disabilities that survive the initial influx and stuff begin to develop magical powers, largely correlating to
To
those
their
disabilities.
disabilities. I love that. I love that. I don't you know, I can see why you might have anticipated getting some pushback, but,
Hmm.
as somebody who has his share of disabilities,
Sure.
I I like the way you took it. I think you treat it with respect. And I mean, you're coming from a place of having a disability yourself, you know.
Hmm.
So I think you treated it um, respectfully, and I think it's yeah, I think it's a fascinating way to handle that. So I'll be interested to see how that plays out in future stories,
Hmm.
for sure. So you've mentioned the Garden of Eden twice now, and um, you may or may not know I've written stories that are born out of my faith,
Hmm.
and um, so I'm curious uh, what the genesis, haha, uh, of making this making part of the Bible story part of your world. What what made you make that decision?
Yeah. So, I mean, that's a great question. It tied into my creation of the world. Um, and so, magic being a missing part of our history is an essential part of this world. And so, I was like, how do we tie that into history? Is that just something that's hidden? There's all kinds of questions that come up if you want to tie this to reality. There have to be layers and traces and stuff. And so what the original prologue for the book was actually a long, like Genesis stylized introduction to the world, very much telling those details that I've kind of dropped hints at. But the flood is essentially, religiously speaking, the flood is a major event depicted in most major religions around the world. There's a flood story of some kind, and that's always fascinated me because it indicates to me that there was historically at some point, regardless of what religion you believe, there was a flood that was pretty massive somewhere at some point in time. I was like, okay, so what if that was the catalyst for magic being removed from our world? Because if there's a worldwide flood, that destroys all history and evidence of everything before it. Right. And so that tied in that idea of a worldwide flood tying into the reason magic was taken out and why we have no record of it or any of those things up back to that point.
Okay. Okay. So, are there any other things that sort of tie into your faith or into the Bible
Sure. I mean,
as a work of literature?
there's a reference to the Tower of Babel in the first book. because Dr. Walker, who's the dwarf who stayed behind, who's the only magical creature in our world that wasn't pulled out by the shattering, essentially implying that she caused the Tower of Babel to prevent the spell from being unwound originally.
Nice.
And then my worldviews and stuff are always intrinsically. It's like C.S. Lewis says, you can, or is it Lewis or Tolkien? One of them said essentially, no, if you write, your faith will come out through your writing, or even if you try to avoid it,
Hmm.
essentially. And so that's another interesting element of the story and Dave's involvement and stuff, because Dave is not a Christian or remotely in the same faith as me. He's agnostic, atheist. And so having the collision of minds and stuff, and having the differences there, and how that feeds into the story and the messages within the story is really interesting.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because it's not a Christian story.
No, and I want to make that clear to the listeners. Like, this is not Michael's, attempt to beat you over the head with the Bible or anything like that. I mean,
Right.
it's, um, I I did not I did not pick up on any of that in my first read, but to know that that's there is interesting, because there's this tension when you have a core belief, whatever that may
Mhm.
be, that's gonna come out in some fashion in the story. And like, not every story I write has uh, a faith element
Right.
that's included in it. Some books address Christianity directly, some not at all. So, it's a creative choice.
Right.
I think you made an interesting creative choice in whether the reader views the Bible as a work of literature or as a book about their faith. Um, Either way, it's an influential book, and the fact that you have incorporated some elements of it, I think, is interesting. So, how long did it take you to write from beginning to publication the first book? Because
About
there's a follow-up question here about the second book. Um,
it took about 6 years.
okay. So, the second book, we're not waiting 6 years, buddy, I'm sorry.
Second book should release next year.
Okay, okay.
This year has been an insane one thing going wrong after another. I wanted to release it this year, but we have not managed to do that. We got beta reader feedback done a few
Mhm.
months ago, and then life's just been a roller coaster. So we're working our way through that, and we're hoping to send the our completed manuscript to our editor either at the end of the year or the start of next year. And I'm hoping for spring, sometime spring, maybe just before summer, final release for book two, Attrition.
How long is this book gonna be? Ballpark.
S- Currently, it's at I think 190,000 words, so it's like 41,000 shorter currently. But we're going back and adding stuff. I don't see the beta reader feedback we got wasn't really any major story changes. It was mostly just enhancing certain elements. So I think it will actually end up being a little shorter.
So you released a book of short stories that also
Mhm.
takes place in the same world.
Yep.
I have my copy. I haven't read it yet. What was the impetus for writing those stories and putting out that collection?
Me needing something to do with my hands while beta readers had book two. Um, my buddy Patrick Lightson has a sci-fi short story collection. It's what was it? It's the stars, something the stars. But Patrick Lightson. I read that recently and it was phenomenal. Just a short collection of short stories. So when book two went to our beta readers, I'm like, oh, I need to do something. And Dave's like, we're not ready to jump into book three yet because we still have changes we're gonna have to make to book two that will feed into that. I was like, well, I got to do something. It's like, let's see if we can write a collection of short stories. We got these ideas. We wanted to see if we could successfully write something short compared to
Uh-huh.
something long,
Right.
and test our abilities and stuff. And so we both had a couple ideas we brought to each other and threw at each other. And we're like, I'm going to write these, you write those, and we'll collaborate and come back and we'll present these stories we have to each other. Not all of them made it to the end, but most of them did. And we came out with, I think, 11 short stories,
Okay.
um, roughly. There's also one in there that is kind of a preview at a novella that Dave wants to write that he's had the concept for a long time, which I'm very excited for. That's going to be Paragon Odyssey, which is a Southern Gothic horror novella. in the same world as the Galvorn
Ooh,
Saga, based on or inspired by the Odyssey, based on a character who disappears in book one and what happened to him.
nice.
So
So I was
very
gonna ask you, are these not books, are these stories, about characters we haven't met yet? Are some
mhm.
of them characters that we have met in the first book? What's the
A little bit of both.
okay,
A little bit of both. We have there's one of the short stories is a chapter that was originally cut from Paragon Exordium about Cheeky and Breeky and how they got their accents.
okay.
So we get the kind of origin of that. One was like when I was doing Patreon, I had like a certain tier where people could get like themselves written in as a sort of short story side chapter. So one of those I loved so much. That's the engineer that it got its own little horror short story. Um, and then we have Dave wrote a phenomenal military piece about Peter's older sister, that her first mission with S&W that has some reoccurring characters like O'Cleary and Jenny. And then we've got one about an elf who collects spider silk for their armor. We've got an interview with Hotch, everyone's favorite military dog. Everyone's little buddy Hotch gets his own little interview. And then there's a goofy story that it starts. I wanted to try my hand at just pure comedy. It's called Manny. Manny is the child of a centaur and a mermaid, but he only has man parts.
Nice.
So we're also doing an audio adaptation for that, and we're doing an ensemble cast. So each book is narrated by a different narrator, or each short story is narrated by a different narrator. So I'm actually going to do Manny. I'm going to narrate the first story, and then the other ones are narrated by some other authors in the community and some other narrators and stuff. So I'm very excited for that. That's almost done.
Fun. Um, so what did you learn from book 1 and from writing the short stories that you're carrying into book 2?
What did I learn? Ooh, that's a great question.
Either the writing process or, um, what have you? Or did you
I
learn
mean, I learned there's
something
an
about the
audience.
world or
Learned there's an audience for this, which is
oh,
something that we didn't know initially when we were querying and stuff. We got a lot of query rejections, and people were like, "There isn't an audience for this." But I was like, "I think there probably is." So we've learned there's an audience,
yeah,
and that's really fun. Um, Learned a lot about editing, and the process and what's efficient as far as editing goes, and how to go back through and edit and try and improve things and strategies for that.
did you discover anything about any of the characters or about your setting that you didn't quite have planned out?
I mean, most of it. Most of it. I mean, there was I made a goal for myself early on in book 1. I wanted a character that was sort of someone no one would like initially. I was like, I want to write a character who no one likes at the start, but they'll like by the end. And my goal was to convince Dave of that, which we succeeded with. He's now one of Dave's favorite characters, and Dave even he has a chapter in book 2 that Dave's like, I want to write this guy's big moment in book 2. This dude who I hated at the start, and I didn't want him in the story. So I've learned how to make people hate someone.
So you've touched on this, in talking about your short stories, that you've written in different genres, and one
Mhm,
of the things that is interesting is you've developed uh, not just a series, but you've developed a story world. You've
mhm.
developed a setting in which you can tell a whole variety of stories. Um, what is your plan for the future for this world? Are we talking, um, games? Are we talking, letting authors play in your playground? Are we talking what are blue
Yeah.
sky? What kinds of things would you like to do with this world?
All of it. I'm building a franchise. That's sort of been like the idea from the beginning is I've always been working toward this being a world that other people can be involved in. Growing up, Star Wars was always a favorite of mine, but my favorite Star Wars wasn't by George Lucas. It was by Timothy Zahn. So I love the idea of there being a world and a universe that other people can love so much that they take part in it and participate in it and stuff. And so we actually have some concepts for that. We've got a board game we're actually working on. We've done some play tests for it, which is currently titled Paragon Apocalypse, which is like it's like a survival board game set in the city of Paragon, where you have to try and collect supplies. It's like a combination of like Catan with a little bit of Betrayal at the House on the Hill and a couple other games. So that's something we're working toward, that we're going to do a Kickstarter for eventually once we have the time. And then Dave pitched a spin-off novella to me that he wants to write. I've got some sequels. We've got 2 sequel series ideas. I'm really open to the idea of other people writing stuff in this world, be it short stories or novellas or full-length series, because there's so much of the world to explore, because our story has primarily just taken place in Georgia. So I'd love to have someone come along and be like, hey, can I tell a story of kind of what's happening over in Korea? Or can I tell a story about some stuff that's happening over in the UK and weave that in, and we can work with the rules and stuff. And that's very much something we want to get into and explore with people.
So speaking of other places, one of the things that you did quite a while back was um, you did this interesting social media thing where you asked your readers, where are you from, what do you do, et cetera, and I'll tell you what your odds are if you survived the shattering and all that good stuff. How much do you know about what's happening in the rest of the world?
A lot.
Okay.
That was a really, and one of the reasons I stopped doing that was because it was just a lot of work to constantly try and make each one unique.
Yeah.
Because I wanted to try it, but it was so intense, because like anything I say now could get brought up later. So I'm speaking canon into existence. So I don't want to shoot myself in the foot with that. Right. So I have a lot of ideas of other places and kind of what in general they look like, and some other genres we want to explore in different areas. Um, but like not by no means the whole world. Everyone's
So,
in a state of derelict. It's just a question of how they've handled it and what other things are around them. What are their challenges?
mhm, mhm. So if you if you could go back and tell a younger version of you, however far back you want to go,
Mhm,
and tell yourself something, give yourself a piece of advice.
mhm.
How far back would you go, and what would that piece of advice be?
When did TikTok start?
uh,
Uh,
that's a good question.
it would essentially be get on board with TikTok and help establish the book talk community
Mhm,
early on, so I could grow more and be part of that initial boom
mhm,
pre-COVID, because books really came back with COVID in a big way. So having a presence there before that would have been, I think, instrumental in getting a foothold. Even if the book wasn't done at that point, having that presence, I think, could have helped elevate its success to a large degree.
absolutely, absolutely. Um, if you could go back and do anything with the book differently,
Mhm.
as far as, aside from, you know, getting involved in TikTok sooner,
Sure.
what the people say, I hate marketing my book. I just, you know, um, how would you, how would you, what marketing, uh,
Yeah.
have you learned? What have you learned about marketing?
Marketing specifically. I mean, getting on there sooner. You can market before your book's done. That's something I missed out on. I didn't
Yes.
join and really start marketing to the social medias until after it was out. It wasn't long after it had been out, but having the ability to build up more hype with people I didn't know for that would have been big. I mean, there's several things that would have changed too. Like I wouldn't have spent a year querying. Uh, we spent a whole year and sent over, like, I think hundreds of query letters and rejections and stuff. And the consistent thing with that was like, yeah, it's just not the market. There's too many factors like working against you. Good story, cool concept, too much working against you. First time author, too big a book, co-authors, etc. Right. I love our cover. I might have gone with an artist who was less expensive. We are going with a different artist for book 2 for our cover. I would have hired a different editor initially. The guy we did, I think, missed some stuff that we've since corrected. and paid a hefty sum. So I would have done more vetting, and that would have been part of the process of getting involved in an online space sooner. I think is having more people to bounce ideas off because we very much did this alone.
Yeah.
We weren't part of any writing communities or online spaces or anything. We just did the book, and we're like, all right, after coming out of the cave with the manuscript, we're like, all right, we got a thing. Oh, there's people out here who could have helped us along the way. Oops.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um, part of the reason I wanted to start doing this YouTube interview series is, um, and the way that I want to do it is I want authors who don't have a book out yet.
Hmm.
I want authors who already have a book out, but their next book's not going to come out for 6 months or a year, because
Hmm.
so much. Um, I want to help people market themselves. So much of the marketing push is I want to market people who have a book coming out, next month or in
Right.
6 weeks or whatever. Well, I want to tell people the same thing you did, which is you need to start letting people know about your stuff now. Um, whether it's coming out in a month, 6 months, a year, um, you need to start building that audience now
Yeah.
because otherwise when you go to launch, you're not going to have anybody to launch to.
Right.
And I want to help people. Um, like I interviewed a guy um, that I just released a video today, and he doesn't have a website.
Hmm.
I wanted to shake him a little bit. So because you need a website. Like
Sure.
it doesn't need to be fancy. It doesn't need to be some elaborate thing. But you need to have at the very least your author name, um, not your book name, in my opinion, uh,
Hmm.
because hopefully you're gonna write a lot of books, and they're all gonna have different
Right.
names.
Right.
We need to know who you are. People want to know about the author as much as they want to know about the book. And so, you know, um, I, I want to, and then I want to help establish authors who, like me, have lots of books out, but
Sure.
just, you know, need a little extra push. Um, so yeah, and one of the things that you seem to be doing well at, and something that I'm taking steps towards is uh, selling your books in person.
Hmm.
Tell me a little bit about your experience doing that.
Yeah, I mean, we've only started doing that this year. So it's a very new process and experience for us. And most of the events I've attended so far, I've either been the only or one of the only authors at.
Mhm.
So that's been very interesting. But like it was a product of like, well, we've had a success online, and I've gone to events with authors and stuff, and it's something I really want to do because I love conventions, I love gatherings and stuff like that. I'm a very social person.
Yes.
Um, and so the first one we did was EpicCon, which is like a Vampire Diaries sort of specific con. It was really geared toward just meeting celebrities more than anything. And that was really interesting because we were also the only vendor, only book people there. But there was a very book heavy crowd. It was a lot of Harry Potter, Vampire Diaries, Gilmore Girls crowd. And like I said, the whole point of that was to like meet the celebrities. And there was a high upfront ticket cost. And the table was initially going to be like $800, which was I was like, well, we can't do that. But it was local. And they when I emailed them, I'm like, hey, I'm a local. I'd love to get in there. And stuff. So, oh yeah, we'll let you in for 100. So I was like, well, that's a steal. I hope
Yes.
it goes well. And it did. It went very well. We actually sold out over 3 days. So that was the first event we did. The second event we did was just a local Comic Con, which we did very well at, which was very interesting. Different crowd for sure. Had to work a little harder for that one because I think the price at the door makes a difference in how much people are willing to spend.
Absolutely.
So EpicCon being really expensive to get in, for some reason, I think made people more willing to spend money on things while they were there. Whereas the Savannah Comic Con was real cheap to get in the door, and people weren't super willing to spend a lot of money. Which isn't to say our books are super expensive; they're very fairly priced. But that was an interesting experience. And then the last one I did was a Ren fair. It was the first Ren fair in the area too, in up in about an hour outside of Savannah, and that went really really well. And I think the big thing that I've learned from these is a lot of authors that I've seen at these. Like I said, there haven't been many, but most of the authors I see at events like this treat it like they are artists, where they sit behind the desk and they have their thing on display and they wait for people to come to them.
Yes.
You're not going to get people that way.
No.
90% of my sales are from me directly addressing people.
Yeah.
I would say I would not sell a fraction what I do the way I do. And it's my approach is super simple. It's just either do you like books or do you like fantasy books to almost every person who walks by my table. And then just building off of that.
So I've been reading your playbook, so to speak. Um, because I think I even asked you on one of your TikToks, like
Hmm.
what are your, or maybe you just posted like your
My 10 tips.
your 10 tips.
Yeah.
And so I kind of read your playbook, and I went to a Comic-Con um a couple of weekends ago.
Hmm.
And I went with a publisher friend of mine and one of the writers that he knows, and we
Hmm.
shared a corner space. So we had a
Nice.
nice big space, plenty of room for everybody to spread their stuff out. And the guy next to us actually left. It was a Saturday and Sunday thing, and the guy next to us left on Saturday and wasn't going to come back because he didn't sell good. He didn't sell well enough, and
Hmm.
he was taking that approach that you said that a lot of writers do. He wasn't being super active.
Right.
I, all day Saturday, was either pretty much either standing, there was a gap between my table and the table next to me. I was either
Hmm.
standing in that gap or standing on the other side of my table. Or when it was super slow, I'd sit down, but
Right.
I'd keep my eyes out for crowd movement. And as soon as somebody came near, I'd be like, "Hey, what do you like to read? What do you like to read?" And then I had my pitches for all my books, because that's the other thing you have to have. You have to have some
Hmm.
kind of pitch, and it helps to tailor it to the age of
Yep.
the crowd that you're dealing with. Because I made a reference to John Shaft. You're not old enough to know who John Shaft is, but you're
Right.
probably pop culture savvy enough to know who John Shaft is. Um, Black exploitation character, and the blank look on her face
Hmm.
was, I wish I had a picture, but so I had to modify my pitch a little bit.
Right.
But like I went to Deep Space Nine because I was like, surely at a comic book convention somebody's gonna know who Deep Space Nine is. She didn't know what Deep
Oh
Space Nine
no.
is. So in any event, you got to have your pitches ready,
Right.
um, and so true story, like I grabbed a couple of my books and I went to these comic book guys. They were selling like they were selling just comic books,
Yeah.
and I went over to um, their booth. There were a couple of booths down, and just to practice my patter, which is another thing
Hmm.
you should do,
Hmm.
practice, practice, practice. I went over to them and I was like, "You guys look like you have refined taste and like you might enjoy reading a good book."
Right.
And I pitched them my books, and uh, I did not expect them to buy. They're vendors too. They're there
Sure.
they're there to make money, not spend money. But one of the guys was like, "I'll absolutely buy
Yeah.
both of those books, and here's $20. Keep the change."
Yeah.
Um, and so you never know who's going to buy. Like,
Well, and other vendors make great customers because if you're at an event like this, you have to be nerdy yourself, right?
yep,
So if someone else is as nerdy enough as me to be there, they're nerdy enough for my book, right? And one
absolutely.
thing I'm going to try and implement going forward that I think is also helpful is I think vendor discounts for other vendors is a great idea
It's
because
actually
you're making allies.
That's actually a good tip. I'm gonna
Yeah.
carry that forward. Because I've sold to vendors before, and like
Yeah.
I was at another Comic Con that I went to. I'm going to a lot of Comic Cons. At another Comic Con I went to, I was talking to the vendor next to me, and he was like, "Let me be your first sale."
Yeah.
Um, and so and this may not apply to you, it may apply to you, but the best piece of advice I ever got was have a book or whatever you sell, have something that you can sell
Hmm.
that is dirt cheap as
Yep.
you can sell it.
Yeah.
Um, and so I have two books that I can sell for $8.
Yeah.
They've got short stories, and I'm selling them. I'm still making a profit,
Right.
but I'm not making a huge profit, and they're a good way to introduce pe- people into my world.
Yeah.
And so I know that your short story book may be something that you're using. You may be using that as a loss leader. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean that's a big part of why we wrote it too, was to have another way to try and tie people into the story. It's like, hey, here's this huge book that's like 25, $35 depending on edition. Here's a small one that's like 10 to 15, and I've even considered adjusting the pricing on that. But I've sold a number apocrypha at events since it came out, and had people read the first story, come back and get exordium before they could leave. I've had it go both ways, and that's one of my favorite things to happen at an event, where someone's like, "Oh, I like the first chapter or this first story of this. I need the other one before he's gone."
Yep. And I even like and upsell.
Right.
I had a guy come by because I was telling him about my book at another booth, and he said, "Let me buy that book you were talking about." And I said, "Well, here's the book I was talking about, and of course, after you read that, you're going to want the novel.
Mhm.
That's the sequel. So here you go." And yeah, he bought both. So, um, I think authors who are willing or able to sort of people a little bit,
Mhm.
um, you know, s- go to these events and connect with potential fans and not just sit there and look at their phone for 8
Right.
hours, can really, move some books and make some fans and have
Yeah.
some good experiences. Um, so, because I mean, yeah, you're gonna sell online, but for me, it's about that connection
Yeah.
that you make.
Yeah.
I wrote a blog post about it a couple of months ago, like why selling a book to you, yes, you in particular, is just such a great thing because it makes that connection. And
Yeah, and I mean, honing in on that connection too is a huge part of it. Like, one of my biggest closers is I have this edition of my book that I take to every convention. That I have people who get signed copies of my book, they get to sign this. This is a first edition copy that I have.
right,
So it's like, hey, if you get a signed copy from me today, you get to sign my book. So when I'm big and famous like George R. R. Martin, I can have a wall of signatures of all the people who supported me early on.
I love that.
People love that.
I've been trying to think of how to adapt that because I've got too many damn books. So,
Just pick like your favorite one,
um, so yeah,
because like whichever book they get to sign this one, and
right,
I'm going to fill the whole 550 pages.
okay, right. I mean, that's like picking my favorite child, but
Okay,
uh,
so pick the one that sells the best, so that people who know it or have read it, when they come back, you can say, "Hey, you've read this. Sign your favorite part of it." Because
good.
no one's going to read this. So I have people sign their favorite number or their favorite scene or their favorite character or stuff like that.
That's a good idea. It's a good idea. Yeah. Um, so yeah, and find local events. There's going to
Hmm.
be a ton of local events, and some of them are going to be bombs, and some of them are going to
Yep.
be great. It's a risk. It's a monetary risk. It's a time risk, but it's worth it, in my opinion. So,
Hmm.
because you never know when you're gonna, you know, have a good one.
Right.
You're gonna make those connections and sell those books. Um, well, Michael, I want to thank you for your time.
Sure
Um,
thing.
tell people where they can find you.
Primarily TikTok. I'm on all the places: YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, Threads, Michael Melwassul, everywhere. We technically have a website, melwassul.com. It's not built. There's a link to our link tree on it, but it exists and it will get built sooner or later.
So,
And yeah, and if you guys haven't checked out Scott's books, he's got I love the Casebook of Esther St. Clair, which is my one of my current reads, and he has another one. I read the sequel first somehow.
I'll tell
Delightful.
you how many times I've done that. Read the sequel first. Read the reading series out of order.
Right.
Is a thing that I do. So yeah, so everybody, yeah, check out Michael's books, and I can't wait to read the short stories, and I can't wait to read book two. If you do arcs, Are you gonna do arcs for
We're
book 2?
undecided on that. I didn't do arcs for book 1. If I do arcs, they're gonna be a very small sort of special thing.
Okay.
We'll see how the next kind of in-person events go because I have an idea for like a box. I want to do like a special box kind of situation. But if we do arcs, it'll be a limited edition thing for people who would actually do something with it. So you would be on the short list for that if you're interested.
I try not to sign up for many arcs 'cause I
Yeah.
don't wanna promise I don't wanna make a promise I can't keep.
I'm really bad about it. That's why I haven't really been convinced to do arcs because I'm really bad at doing arcs myself.
Alright. Well, thank you so much,
Mhm.
and we'll talk to you soon.
May you walk under blue skies.
Thanks.